Reporting and supporting what matters, this is CT Examiner Weekly.
I'm reporter Amy Wu with the latest dish on the USDA's recent changes to the food pyramid and the potential cost impact on school lunches and what appears on the menu.
For more than 3 decades, it stood as a symbol of corporate muscle and the nerve center for World Wrestling Entertainment's most epic battles. Now WWE's former Stamford headquarters is set to undergo a makeover for a new kind of contest, housing. I'm reporter Eric Obernauer with that story.
So for the last year, I think the conversation in Connecticut has been about how do we build new housing? But what about the people that live in housing now? And my reporters have been up in Hartford taking a look at housing conditions, cost, fair rent commissions, and seeing about the people that actually live in apartments now.
I'm your host, Brian Scott Smith, and along with our reporters, of course, we're joined by Greg Stroud, who you just heard, editor-in-chief, and Robin Breeding, our arts editor. Welcome to you all. The school lunch tray is likely to undergo another overhaul as new federal dietary guidelines raise questions for school districts about the cost of meals and what ends up on students' plates. Earlier this month, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the U.S. Department of Agriculture released the Dietary Guidelines for Americans 2025 to 2030, which includes key changes that may impact school meals. Our reporter Amy Wu joins us in the studio to talk about her reporting on this story. Now, Amy, welcome. Tell us what happened specifically when the changes were made.
So the USDA every 5 years issues new dietary guidelines. The bottom line is that the food pyramid has been a bit flipped this time around, with red meat like steak moving towards the top, and also at the same time dairy products like whole milk, butter, potentially more fatty products, I guess, moving to the top. Fruits and vegetables still stay the same, but whole grains has actually shifted closer to the bottom. What's interesting also is that there's a focus on ultra-processed foods, though, for the first time. So how does this impact like the school lunches? Is that obviously these dietary guidelines go across the board for all, suggested guidelines go across for all Americans, but on the school lunch, this could change the school lunch menu.
So, Amy, when we're talking about the food triangle, we're talking about something that we've all known about, and what they've effectively done is they've just flipped it on its head.
Yeah, that is the bottom line. So this means that the schools, food service directors, kitchen directors are concerned, but it's still early days because they're still focused on making the changes from 2020 to 2025 dietary guidelines. But this is a big change.
So potentially, I mean, protein costs money. I mean, this is agricultural policy as well as school lunches. We know this won't happen for a while. We do know that there is for all the politics, there is probably a consensus that young people in particular eat too much processed food. And so this is one way is, even the school lunches tend to assemble a lot of products. And one thing is, let's not give young people as much processed food. Let's give them more meat, whole fat, less maybe carbohydrates.
Yes, Greg, absolutely. I mean, the aspect of ultra processed food, actually ultra processed food is a great concern, increasing concern, right, on not only on the school lunches but beyond. But so there is a focus on diminishing that, but I just want to say that in terms of the impact on the menus themselves, the school lunch directors don't foresee that that's going to happen until several years. Everybody's on the same page that this is a good thing, that there's a focus on diminishing ultra processed food. And when we talk about ultra processed food, it's a complex word, but let's think about corn. There's corn on the cob, there's corn in a can, and there's also corn like tortilla chips. So ultra processed food syrup is the tortilla chip, but it could also be shifted more to the can. So the focus is more on the cob.
So I think the other thing we saw up is that last night, the governor of Connecticut, Ned Lamont, gave his State of the State address. And one of his points of emphasis was on universal school lunches. And so that is potentially fairly expensive. Some of the changes, some of the economics for school lunches will change as the menu changes and as potentially with federal subsidies changing or diminishing under the current administration.
Robin.
One thing I found interesting in your article, Amy, was that one school in particular was using growing of vegetables as a way to combine with their curriculum. And I thought that was a really interesting and innovative way to go about things. And I was wondering if any other schools are doing that.
Yes, absolutely. That is the exciting part of this, is that the USDA only does subsidize a big chunk of it. But outside of that, schools like Groton are going after their own grants to develop what they call, farm to school. So integrating education, teaching kids like where is their food coming from, who is growing it, and combining that with educating them on eating more fresh, locally grown vegetables has been a big part of the curriculum. But they are looking for their own grants and money for that, and partnering with local farmers, local food producers as well. So that's a really exciting part of it.
I know that actually the Department of Agriculture is very hot on this because they've spoken about that in the past, about trying to get more farmers, because people forget Connecticut is a big farming state. So we've got plenty of things that we grow. So, that in itself can be helpful, but can also still be quite costly as well, because sometimes even buying locally isn't also the cheapest option. Greg?
I mean, what you see is a state like Connecticut it's really a good state for something like school lunches, because we do not excel at commodity products. The things that are mass produced, the things that are ultra processed, aren't the things that Connecticut does well. We do well with value added, with small farms, with high quality produce that's actually often grown just 10 miles from any school. And so the opportunities there are big. I know we saw this also in Middletown. We saw this in Old Saybrook, where some really innovative, really excited food directors are creating these programs, and it makes, it's a great educational thing for the kids.
Yeah, so I would say that for the latest changes with the dietary guidelines and the food guidelines is that the school directors are concerned on cost, certainly, because dairy and meat is expensive. But on the other hand, they have these programs that have been going on with the local partnerships already, and with this focus in education. So I feel like on one side they're like, okay, we're going to have to make some of these shifts for sure, but on the other hand, we have our own plans and our own, like, hydroponic farming is happening in Groton. They're producing like 800 lettuce heads, a month, and it's going on the hamburgers, it's going on the chicken sandwiches. So, yeah.
So I think one thing that we'll see, it's always a question. It comes down to money and how this will be paid. And so on the state level with the governor, we're seeing a commitment to school lunches, but will that play out on the local level where most of school funding comes from? And that's to be seen. There are a lot of people competing for a limited number of dollars.
Amy, thanks for that story. Great reporting. Now, the Stanford office tower, where professional wrestling's grandest battles and epic smackdowns were once plotted over conference tables, will soon be getting a facelift for what promises to be a very different kind of contest, as Stanford residents are vying for a limited supply of apartments and housing in the city. Our reporter Eric Obernauer joins us remotely now. Eric, after 3 decades, it's the end of Titan Towers. Tell us more.
Yeah, well, that WWE tower is almost the perfect symbol of what's been happening with Stanford real estate generally. For more than 30 years, it really stood out as a symbol of Stanford's corporate muscle. Now it's becoming housing, I believe, 84 apartment spaces, which is a shift that captures that what's been happening not just in Stanford only, but probably other parts of Connecticut, certainly across much of the country too, particularly since COVID and the advent of remote work. And it's interesting to see how Stanford is adapting, because of course Stanford has so much office space that in some ways was built for a world that doesn't quite exist anymore.
Greg.
Yeah, so growing up in New York, I know in the 70s and 80s, I mean, part of what we did is we watched businesses move out of New York and into Connecticut, sometimes for favorable tax policies that don't actually exist anymore and haven't existed for quite a long time in Connecticut. And so you do see this fabric of these quite fancy, quite attractive apartment buildings, sometimes nestled into residential areas. And we see them in North Stamford. We see them along the shoreline. And what to do with them? The communities aren't always so willing to build housing in these areas, I think. Eric, so do you see a lot of opposition with this, or is this something that's just a sort of obvious thing to do?
Well, I think it's a little of both. I mean, two things can be true at the same time. From looking at how to make use of real estate, from that standpoint, it makes sense to put it to a use for which there's definitely demand, as opposed to just letting it sit idle. Demand for commercial real estate obviously has softened, but that demand has just, when it comes to residential housing, apartments, we continue to see there's just not enough supply. On the other hand, it's human nature, and I'm not saying this disparagingly. It is probably hardwired into human nature in some ways that we all fear change, and a lot of people resist change. Certainly, we see that happening in Stamford as well.
So, Eric, when we're talking about these apartments, that's all very well, but can people actually afford them?
Well, that's, and again, you really stumbled onto a really important point, because critics of what's happening will say, well, even if the idea is to meet the need for affordable housing, a lot of what's being built is really upscale luxury housing, where even with the WWE building, those are going to be mostly upscale apartments. There will be some affordable units, about 6 or 7, I think. But now, of course, there is the reply to that, or the response to that as well. Supply is still fungible. So there's only so much demand for upscale or luxury housing. So if you're flooding that market with more supply, eventually some of that is going to spill over or trickle down, if you will, to the market for affordable housing, and there still will be a residual effect. Has that actually happened in Stamford, though? Just in terms of facts on the ground, no. We're continuing to see the price of housing, just apartments, just go up and up.
So, we have something funny happening here in Stamford. How many medium or large size cities actually have hundreds, maybe, or even more than hundreds of high income potential residents that want to move into the city? And so you have people demanding apartments at $4,000, $5,000. So what mayor can turn that down? On the other hand, I think part of what we're seeing, and Eric can correct me on this, is that people that actually live in Stamford are saying, what about us? It's fine to bring in these high-income people, but our rents are going up. Our taxes are going up. And who are you the mayor for? Are you the mayor for the people to come that are arriving, or the people that are here?
Well, yes, Greg. And in fact, in the last mayoral campaign, that line was, I heard that line more than once, saying, it's not our job in Stamford to meet the housing needs of New York, basically. But this is another. This gentrification is kind of the catch-all term that people use that we're seeing happening, and for longtime Stamford residents, this is a real concern, because now what also seems to be happening in some cases is landlords see an opportunity to tap into this luxury market, if you will, and for those who are economically on the lower end or vulnerable, they're being pushed out in some cases. And then this is also spurring growing calls for something in the way of just cause legislation, basically to not allow people to be evicted if there's not just cause. So I think that's another thing that we're seeing growing calls for.
The other thing as well, Eric, I understand again from your reporting, seniors and empty nesters are no longer being able to find a smaller unit to move into, because of course there's a lack of availability, and then also, the pricing issue as well. I'm just going to give the final comment to Greg because we do need to move on to our final story.
Well, I think this one brings us to our final story, really, and it's what Amy Wu, right across from me, what she's been working on in Hartford, is people that are in housing now are fearing that if they speak up about unsafe conditions, unsanitary conditions, if they speak up about rents, they're fearing that they will get evicted and they'll have no place to go. And so we're seeing that. Certainly I've heard that in Stamford from people that are living in even fairly high rent apartments. They're saying, we had a case in Stamford of an electrocution from dripping water. And, and we have people that are, you'd be amazed at the number of people that are stuck in elevators and rescued from elevators every week by the fire department. And there's these longer running problems and sort of getting this balance right and still getting people to invest is tricky. And I think Amy, just to bring her in, it's like you've been talking about up in Hartford. I think the mayor came out with a list of what they identified, what they claim are bad landlords. And those are people that they might be landlords, but many of them are from out of state and investing in Connecticut. So is that a bad thing?
Well, the bottom line is like this. A couple of years ago when the mayor came on, there's a list. It's a slumlord list. There's at least 8 slumlords on this list right now. And the idea behind the list is to kind of spotlight and shame those who have the greatest number of violations. The story is that there are still a high number of violations. There's about, since July 2024 to end of December, just, a couple months ago, there's been like 1,800 violations. Now the city is saying, we also spoke with Judith Rothschild, who's the head of the department under the city that actually leads the blight team as well. They are tackling the violations, which the top violation, by the way, is the heat issue, especially during this freezing cold winter. Tackling it stride by stride, but still a high number of violations and problems, especially with the growth of the outside investors, especially during COVID that emerged, that there's a higher number of investors coming in, buying up buildings. And if you look at the slumlord list, those 7 or 8 folks on this year's list that just came out, a lot of them are from out of town. So it's still a big problem in the city of Hartford as well.
So, I think this is a story we saw across the state with COVID, is that people were either coming into the state to find a house, to find a refuge. We found one of the great stories is David Standrich, the chef at Shipwright's Daughter, who's up for a national award. He was fleeing New York City and was coming out here to start a restaurant. We saw that up in Hartford when we've reported on that. All this energy and capital, which has made money for some people. And, it's hard to oppose people investing in our cities. On the other hand, it can sometimes make them less, I think Amy can speak to this, there's difficulty finding them, or there's difficulty controlling them. And maybe their interests don't really necessarily lie in the health of our cities and the fabric of our cities, but in something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In speaking to like Judith and the mayor and so forth, they talked a lot about the different tools to tackle the slumlords. Everything from they've really beefed up their inspectors and that team that's going out there to look at the different violations. And there's also, different programs. There's the Fair Rent Commission, and there's also at the same time a relocation assistance program to quickly move folks who, everything from lack of heat to mice, rodents. These are some of the most common violations, insects, termites, and so forth. But at the same time, there is there's still a pause on what can we do to tackle the shift in the out of state as well. But with this list, the bottom line is that after releasing it the day of, the city is saying that the landlords, at least 80% of them, called up the city and was like, "What can I do about this? I'm on your list." Wow. Everything from Shlomo, which is one of the top violators, on the list, just saying to the city, please tell us what we can do about this. This is according to the city. Now we'll have to follow up and see what's being done.
Nothing better than a bit of, so like naming and shaming. Is there, Eric, your thoughts on this as well? Because, we were talking obviously about housing, from, the Stanford, the Greenwich sort of area, same sorts of things are happening there, I'm guessing.
There is a legitimate question to be asked. Is naming and shaming always the way to encourage more investment in apartments, in housing, and especially in affordable housing? One other aspect of this, it's something of a taboo to even mention it because it's failed and just come with so many problems in other places where it's been tried. But what about public housing? Is that something that we should that maybe needs to enter the discussion again? It hasn't worked so well here, but and actually in other parts of the world, it's actually worked pretty well.
It's a dirty word for some reason, and I don't know why, Greg.
Well, it's also it's a question of vouchers and using vouchers as well, and whether those vouchers are portable so they can take them to multiple towns. I think there is no one. There's not going to be one big solution. One solution I know that Ali Lemaster has been working on in southeastern Connecticut has been particularly these fair rent commissions, and that's the idea of larger towns in Connecticut are actually required now by the legislature to have fair rent commissions, and those can take on landlords that are raising rents, potential retaliation. Their power is maybe a little bit soft power, a little bit of people power, and not everyone likes it. And probably if not everyone likes it, then it's probably doing something good.
Amy.
City also mentioned the existing program where they're trying to train and cultivate local folks, in Hartford, to train them in how to be responsible landlords as well. They are hoping that there will be more local folks who will be the landlords also. And they did mention also this, the current development going on with buildings. There's at least 5 or 6 projects where there's a collaboration with the city and the developer on the financing as well.
I just want to quickly mention before we give Greg the final word on this, people unionizing as well, which we're seeing happening across the state of Connecticut, where they feel that they don't have the protections that they need, even if they do have a fair rent commission as well. Greg.
Yeah, we're actually seeing tenant unions set up by tenants and actually tenant unions set up by landlords. So this has been a fight. I think one thing is one of the big conversations has been the so-called missing middle. And this means these smaller ideas, whether they're ADUs, whether they're splitting single houses into multifamily house. These are typically projects that are not going to be made by big corporations. These require small landlords, small investors, and getting those people on board and sort of crowdsourcing some of our solutions to housing, I think makes sense. But they need to have, those landlords also need to have a regulatory environment, a business environment where it makes sense. And that's going to be a trick.
We will have to leave it there. It is a subject which I think we'll probably do a special on at some point later in the year, housing. But Amy and Greg, thanks ever so much for that. And also Eric for your contribution to it. Time to take a look at some events happening in and around the state with our arts editor, Robin Breeding. Robin, what do you have for us?
Well, coming up on Saturday, February 21st, at Grace Farms in New Canaan, we have a cello recital. It's Arlene Hlusko, who is the current artist in residence there, and the theme is called In Common Folk. And she is an artist who has performed all over the country. She's performed internationally, and she's currently working as an artist there, trying to bring together community and conversation between different kinds of performers and artists. And I think that's a theme in her work. One thing I would say is Grace Farms, if you haven't been there, is a beautiful facility. It's almost like a Philip Glass kind of structure that's out in the woods. So you'd be going to listen to concerts in this beautiful setting, and it's worth looking into their programming.
It sounds really interesting, actually. I'm looking at some of the research here, and it says music spanning Appalachian folk songs, German hymns, jazz standards, and thoughtful improvisations. I mean, what a good cross-section. And it also then goes on to say, she weaves it with familiar tunes and pieces not yet heard. Sounds absolutely amazing.
This is something, it actually sounds a lot like the musical masterworks here in Old Lyme, where they have Appalachian music. They have these, and trying to bring in community. I mean, one of those things I think is that classical music performers do not want this to be simply a dead language, if you will. They want this to be a living art form, and that requires people to participate and young people to come out.
Absolutely. And that's music at Grace Farms, New Canaan, Saturday, February 21st, 4:30 to 6 p.m. What's next for us, Robin?
Well, next up is an annual event. It starts February 27th and it runs through March 6th, and it's at the Westport Library. And the event is called Verso Fest, and it's this massive forum where media creators, artists, and fans all get together, have conversations, performances, and workshops, and they bring in a heavy hitting line of people to come in there. You have people like Annie DeFranco, who's singer-songwriter with Lauren Coyle Rosen, who's also a cultural anthropologist. We have big performers like The Thing is the kickoff concert. It's a big event.
So you have Westport, which is this creative hub of Connecticut. A lot of money there, all the creative people, everyone from the Rolling Stones and the Talking Heads and great artists, visual artists, all there. And this is their yearly creative concert that brings them all out, brings all those connections and brings them right here. I think the tickets are pretty, you have to jump on this one. I think.
I can tell you that some past Verso Fest guests have actually included some legends like the Wallflowers and the Spin Doctors. So, I mean, we're talking a great event there. What else have you got for us, Robin?
Let's go to the Special Olympics, which are coming up on February 28th and through March 1st. And it's the Special Olympics Connecticut Winter Games. And it's happening at various locations all over the state. We have Powder Ridge, Middlefield, Windsor, East Hartford, Farmington, Simsbury, and Waterbury. So we have alpine skiing, we have snowshoeing, gymnastics, floorball, and basketball. And I think it's an opportunity for people to go out and support these young people who are just really working hard. And it's a partnership also with United Sports Partners, who also help train these athletes. Also, it's SOCT.org for more information on that.
What else have you got for us?
Next up is a documentary film screening on Tuesday, March 3rd at the Yale Macmillan Center in New Haven. And this film is called The Day Iceland Stood Still. And this is the documentary screening and then a Q&A with the director, Pamela Hogan. And what this is about is in 1975, in October, all of the women in Iceland decided that they were going to refuse to work, cook, care for their children, anything. They were really frustrated by labor conditions, and they went on strike. And it brought the country to a standstill.
So this is almost another, if we went from the Olympics, now we've gone to the Lysistrata. So the classic women go on strike, certainly. And what happens? That sounds like a great one, a fun one.
It does.
And a final one from you as well, if you would.
Oh, okay. Let's go to Quick Center for the Arts in Fairfield, Tuesday, March 3rd. We have a dance performance by Manuel Roque called Bang Bang. And I think it's a performance where two dancers put themselves to the test, really pushing themselves to the limit. It's an intense performance, apparently really interesting stuff.
So it's a contact improv kind of thing? Or
I think that they go, these two people work together, and it's a work that does involve combativeness, but they really work to reveal their own human flaws during the performance, because they really get extremely tired and have to push through these limitations.
So for more details on that, that's the Fairfield University Quick Centre for the Arts in Fairfield, and the date on that is Tuesday, March 3rd at 8 and 9 p.m. That's all for this edition. As I say, thank you again to Robin, Greg, Amy and Eric. Don't forget to check out the digital pages of ctexaminer.com for the stories you've just heard about and many more, and our events calendar for all the latest happenings here in the state and elsewhere. And while you're there, why not subscribe to make sure you don't miss out on all of the week's news? It's just $20 for the entire year. Yes, you heard it right, just $20 for the year. This is CT Examiner Weekly, reporting and supporting what matters. I'm Brian Scott Smith. Thanks for listening.